think it's time to discuss your philosophy of drug use as it relates to artistic endeavor.
To keep doing daily videos on YouTube, I need to raise my Patreon and Subscribestar income to a grand total of $200 a month. So if you're so inclined, help a chap out. Zang. Hello lovelies, sorry I've been away, been ill, double ear infection, and I still can't quite hear properly, but there you go. Very painful, very debilitating, haven't slept much, and I'm telling you that going into this because it may well affect what I have to say here. And it's important to preface also with the fact that I used to be highly involved in SLA Industries. I was on paper the line developer for a little while, although I was given no direction and no money, so nothing really happened with that. I wrote Cannibal Sector 1, I wrote Ursa Carrion, I wrote the data packet for the Gator Stormer. I consulted a great deal, contributed to Hunter Sheets, used to know Dave Alsop really well. He used to room with Angus Abramson, I'd spent a lot of time with on various projects and in regard to the Live Action Roleplay Society, which we were both a part of, the Camarilla playing Vampire and so on. And me and Dave used to stay up late into the night watching bad horror movies and discussing SLA and plans and ideas, and we very much seemed to be on the same wavelength. And so I was rather upset to discover that a lot of the work that I've done, while a lot of it, or ideas that I worked on, or things from the Soft Company's book that I wrote that was never published, a lot of bits and pieces from that have worked their way into SLA Industries anyway. But almost all of the big projects that I did, like Cannibal Sector 1, seem to have been a memory hold, ostensibly because they don't fit with the new canon or whatever, but there are things in the new canon which run directly contradictory to the things that me and Dave used to talk about. It's a bit upsetting. May or may not have something to do with falling out with Jared Earl, who's also heavily involved in SLA Industries, but who lost his mind around Gamergate and couldn't handle my supporting of what it really was, because he mistook it for what it was being presented as, and this was basically irreconcilable. So I'm a bit upset with them. Feeling a bit betrayed, and I got some long-term feelings of betrayal coming from Jared. I'm a bit upset going into this, and I haven't slept properly, and I'm still in quite a bit of pain and still can't quite hear properly, so that's where we are. SLA was a post-cyberpunk game, in the way that you could say the new wave was a post-punk musical movement. It still retained a lot of the sensibilities and the styling and so on, but it wasn't that anymore. And SLA approached that in a number of different ways. It was much more directly and overtly critical of hypercapitalism than the cyberpunk genre was, which just sort of presented it as a matter-of-fact things. Yeah, corporations were evil and so on, but in SLA it's a monolithic corporate evil that is also the government, and it also took aim at things like welfare culture, mass unemployment. SLA was very British, very heavily influenced by 2000 AD, I think, and also from the situation of growing up in Scotland during the Thatcher years. So there's a very anti-Thatcherite bent to the whole thing. But it's all done through metaphor and allegory, through skillful storytelling, not through beating you over the head. a second edition of SLA Industries is on the way, different rules and so on. I backed the Kickstarter to the hilt because whatever our difference is, I still believe in the game and believe in 80% of the guys behind it, I suppose you might say. But I just received a sort of alpha draft of the final game, and I'm a little bit disappointed and put off and a little bit upset about it, but it's hard to disentangle what of that is due to my past relationships with the people involved and so on, and what is the game itself. Now, I already talked about the draft rules that were put out, so I won't go over that ground anymore, but I'll talk about the presentation that I'm seeing, keeping in mind this is only an alpha draft, and the content and the lore. Now, the original SLA Industries came out in 1992, and it had a very 90s sensibility to it, very grim and gritty black and white art, grim and gritty, hopeless setting. Again, you're reinforced and informed by, I think, living and growing up in the 80s in the UK. This one seems to lack quite as much subtlety, though it's never really overtly political. And that presentation has changed, and I'm not entirely sure it's for the better. So the original one had this black and white, grimy, sort of fanzine aesthetic that would then be highly contrasted with the more sort of slick corporate imagery, at least in the covers of books like Karma, for example. So you had the grim reality and the sort of hyper-real, intensely commercial aesthetic that SLA itself had. The new game doesn't really follow through on that aesthetic, which is a shame, because looking at things like hunter sheets and some of the data packets and the sort of racial and enemy information drops, they found a way to present pretty much the same aesthetic, but to do it in colour. But that doesn't seem to have been followed through on in this new main book. It doesn't feel as grimy. There's a lot of day glow and bright colours, and the white space that worked in the original book in its layout doesn't work so much here in combination with the full colour, more brightly coloured art. It's just aesthetically it doesn't work as well as it did in the beginning, in the old versions of the book. It just doesn't convey the setting as effectively, as meaningfully. And that's a huge shame, because the original SLA Industries, particularly the later supplements and so on, mixed the art and the text in a way that was the current sort of art punk movement before there was an art punk movement in RPGs. So the presentation is disappointing, and not just the presentation. I mean, the artwork is good, it's just it's not used to the best effect, and it doesn't seem to be in synergy with the page layout and the text. When it comes to the setting and the text, this is where there's a lot of things that I think a lot of people are going to find controversial and disappointing. Shakhtars, who are sort of Klingon/Predator hybrids, they look much too human now. They've lost their more alien aspect. They no longer have that same predatory look. Particularly the female Shakhtars look like humans in a flesh tendril wig. This is unfortunate, but it's something that's been known about and anticipated in a long time. But to actually see it there in the main book and so on, is just disappointing. Advanced carrion are included. This was something that back in our discussions, including the advanced carrion, was almost viewed with regret, and that's why in Cannibal Sector 1 and other stuff that I worked on, I was basically instructed to downplay and even try and retcon advanced carrion. But here they are as an integrated full race. We have a new alien race, the Nero, who are sort of birdmen who don't particularly seem in keeping with SLA Industries. If they were more like crows, kenku, something like that, there might be a more aesthetically appropriate race, but they just seem tacked on and out of place in the company that they're in. The background also seems to be talking about a kinder, gentler SLA Industries, where it's an empire on the way out, where if they don't change their wicked hyper-corporate ways, then they're going to completely collapse and be in a lot of trouble. They're under pressure from all sorts of different directions. And I can appreciate the desire for change, and perhaps the desire to satirize and draw influence from more modern politics, but then at the same time I don't think anything has particularly changed on that front since the era of Thatcher and Reagan, other than it having gotten worse, if anything. So the idea of the sort of rotting, stagnant corporate dictatorship seems more appropriate now, and trying to turn that on its head or make SLA Industries go through a process of decolonization and apology just doesn't seem to fit the setting as we've always understood it. But what really defines this alpha draft of the main book to me is the things that are missing. Training packages used to have charming names like Kick Murder Squad. So you would have been trained as an assassin, which, martial arts and kicking, hence kick murder. So that little twitch of humour here and there, dark humour, is missing. Ammo types are missing. That might not mean a lot, but a big part of the SLA setting is that bullets are hyper expensive. This is to discourage the use of ranged weapons, in part to keep society under control, but also to encourage operatives, which is who you tend to play in SLA Industries, to keep operatives from just shooting everybody, because it's boring and it doesn't make good television. Right? This is, again, a hyper-real, high-media, high-corporate society, so your effectiveness on a mission is perhaps less important than how flashy, how stylishly you can do away with your opponents. But that meant that hyper-customizing your guns and selecting the right type of ammo when you were going to use it used to be very important. And missing a lot of ammo types, you can understand it from a desire to get away from the crunch, but gun bunny characters, amosexual characters, this is an important thing for them. And stylistically in the setting, when you take a shot, you want to make sure it's a shot that counts and maybe even turns the tide, and part of that comes through the ammunition. I haven't completely catalogued it, but there seem to be a lot of missing weapons, particularly the sort of forearm strapped clip killer submachine guns. Couldn't find a reference to them. That was always a player favourite. It's a shame that those aren't there. And other pieces seem to be missing, but I haven't catalogued the whole lot. And then going into the background, away from that sort of thing, and the consumerism and equipment selection was always a big important thing. It's like, but moving away from that to the background, a lot of things have been excised or removed, sometimes without any explanation, sometimes with a dissatisfactory explanation, sometimes not just mentioned at all. So what Mort, the main world, had several levels of policing. So you would have monarch law enforcement, who were like your local area bobby, your community outreach officers, standard policemen. Then you would have the shivers, who were a sort of gendarme, SWAT, sort of slightly higher level of response, bully boy, militarized police force. Then you would get into things like SLA operatives, who were sent to investigate crimes. They were more like your FBI or your serious crimes unit. that sort of thing. And then you would have the secret police like Stigmata and so on at the very highest of levels. They've gotten rid of Monarch, which means the Shivers are now enforcing everything everywhere, but there's no real explanation as to why, what happened to them. It's just, there's no Monarch anymore. I can understand that if you look at the militarization of policing in the United States, for example, why you would want to go that route. But there's a story there that needs to be told. Vevafons, the shape-shifting Stormers are biogenetically engineered super soldiers that SLA uses a lot everywhere and is responsible for their ascent to power. Vevafons, gone. Not much of an explanation. Again, there's a story there, and it was a popular character type for a lot of people. Chagrin Stormers, the huge ones with the tusks, gone. Apparently they've all been withdrawn to fight on War Worlds, but no real explanation as to why, and again, that was a very popular Stormer variant for a lot of people. The Grit Stormers are no longer present or mentioned, but Gators are, but there's no rules for playing them, and they seem to have almost been combined with the Grit Stormers. It's a shame. Ebb powers have changed. Red and Blue Thermal is divided between the two races. Illumination and Blast have been combined as powers, and perhaps most fundamentally to the setting, and not just to people who would want to play Brain Wasters or Ebons, you can no longer turn into a Lycanthrope. And I know that's going to disappoint and upset a lot of my players, because that was always this sort of ultimate goal for the campaign if you chose to play one of those kinds of characters, an Ebon or a Brain Waster. It was to ascend and possibly become a Lycanthrope, in the same way a very powerful wizard in another game might seek to become immortal, or to become a lich, or whatever else. To become a Lycanthrope was, that was a big goal. It was something very important and integral, not just to the enjoyment of players, but to the setting itself, and that's gone. It's not going to be too difficult to add a lot of this stuff in, or ignore certain other aspects of this new version of the setting. I'm not 100% sold on the rules. I need some actual combat experience with them, but this background have just left me feeling along with all the stuff that was removed, because there's a hell of a lot of good stuff in the things that I wrote, and I honestly believe if Cannibal Sector 1 hadn't been interfered with, it should have been an Origins Award winner. Of everything I've ever written, the draft that I submitted of Cannibal Sector 1 was probably my second favourite overall out of everything I've ever done. And it's just a shame it got screwed with. So, I don't know. Take it all with a pinch of salt. I'll probably do a full-on re-review when I get the final version of SLA Industries 2nd edition, and I might well make it my new online game, because it can be very mission focused, mission based. I'm not sure how the new system will cope with experience levels as they rise, but it's worth finding out, I think, and I always did enjoy playing Slay. Zang.
Postmortem Studios, role-playing games, and a lot more to die for. Post-mort.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, a single bottle of Reverend Dr. Grimm's Miracle Elixir will solve your constipation, dissipation, exculpation, obstipation, extirpation, bastardization, demoralization, amortization, accusation, disorganization, boulderization, malversation, dehumanization, plagiarization, demonization, feminization, localization, categorization, stigmatization, monetization, pulverization, and rationalization, sterilization, victimization, infatuation, insinuation, vexation, masturbation, perturbation, litigation, subjugation, and the French pox, or your money back, as used by the crowned heads of Europe.